This is The KJ Show. The KJ Show with host Dr. Katherine Johnson is a mix of breaking news and practical advice on the many ways in which the energy industry can affect you and your family. Katherine will combine energy updates and conversations with leaders in the energy efficiency community. So please welcome your host, Dr. KJ.
Hello, and welcome to the KJ Show with me, Dr. Katherine Johnson, your energy expert on our new YouTube channel. So today's episode is going to focus on something I've talked a little bit about in the past, but I wanted to sort of bring it up again and add some new flavors to it because it's back in the news. And this is the fact that there is no consensus on when we've reached the 1.5 death knell degree Celsius. No one has ever decided when that will happen. It's not in the Paris Accords. And that's what we're going to talk about today, because they're actually really measuring climate change is actually a moving target. Maybe that's why they had everybody sign on. It was easy to sign on to something that has no teeth in it, which is the Paris Accord. But meanwhile, I like to always start with something fun to breaking news you can't make up. And I guess U.S. University of San Diego didn't get the memo that climate science isn't correct, because now the University of San Diego, California, San Diego, based in La Jolla, California, by the way, one of the most beautiful places on the planet, says that climate change, every student must now take a class on climate change, and climate change is the new liberal arts part of the curriculum. And every student is required to take class. Oh, but don't worry, there's not just one class. They can actually take up to 50 different choices of classes on climate change, but they're required to take at least one. And it was rolled out last year for the first year students. And when the leaders of the University of California, San Diego, thought that students aren't going to be prepared for the world of climate change, that they're not going to be able to, if they don't understand it. And they talk about all the things that climate change is supposedly causing, like rising sea levels, water scarcity, fires, flooding, storms, declining biodiversity, all of which we now know isn't true. So I'm wondering if they're going to rescind this requirement. And they argue that every job will be affected. Really? I don't know. So Arizona State University, another rather liberal place, said that students almost take a course in sustainability. Now watch it. Sustainability is going to become the new code word for climate change when climate change falls out of favor because it's been basically discredited. So they're going to have San Diego and also San Francisco State University also said that climate justice is a requirement. Now, climate justice is really, really out there. So the courses at UC San Diego can actually fulfill the requirements across 23 disciplines, including sustainable development and psychology of climate change. What about the misinformation? Religion and ecology, energy economics, that actually makes sense, and several classes in environmental and science and oceanography. But, the leaders also are working to develop classes to satisfy the life cycle of a computer. Climate change, according to a professor, is the new liberal arts, and colleges should take it seriously. Oh my, the indoctrination continues. And so that was an interesting story. But the other one that I can't make up, I really wish I could, but there is a German citizen, Naomi Siebert, who is a German political activist. You can put up her picture. She is aligned with the far right in Germany, which means, of course, she's bad. She's viewed as the alternative to Greta Thunberg. You want to put up her picture? Anyway, so this young lady has decided to basically say, no, we're not going to go the far left way that Germany is going, and actually is reflecting the views of most of the electorate. But she says she's being persecuted in Germany and has received death threats by Antifa, and the German police don't really seem to care that much. Now, if it were Greta Thunberg, who wouldn't be challenged by Antifa because she's part of them, if there were any other German citizen, don't you think if you get death threats, you have the entitled to at least have the police look into it? It's because of her ideas. And I don't think anybody should get a death threat because of their ideas. But Germany's Federal Office for Protection said it has the party itself, the party that she represents, which is an alt-right Alternative for Germany, or AfD party, they consider as far extreme and is classified right-wing extremist organization, and therefore she doesn't deserve the protections because she's a German citizen who doesn't agree with police, she doesn't get protected. Um, how is that correct? I mean, you don't have to agree with your beliefs to believe that everybody has a right to life, right? Isn't that sort of fundamental humanity? But it's Germany, okay? Siebert moves to claim she wants to claim asylum in the United States, where she'll be safe. Unfortunately, with Trump's crackdown on immigration and all these different visas, she's having a hard time getting her asylum plea approved. She said that it's there they want to move. Obviously Trump is focusing on getting rid of bad people, and they just did another roundup with 150 sex abusers who were kicked out. But they said that because the immigration policy is so right now, as according to this article, hard line, they're not going to let her in, which I don't think is true. But the Republicans have raised concerns over racial profiling of immigrants during the whole crackdown. So she's a German citizen who's receiving death threats because of her beliefs don't align with the current political atmosphere. And some people in Germany, not all of them, a lot of them actually do agree with her. But she said her goal is to become an American citizen, and she wants to do it the right way. She wants to come to America, go through the process, go through the immigration process, go through all the right things to do. She's not trying to come here illegally, and she can't. And it's sort of sad because I thought that's what America was about. I thought we were about letting people who are being persecuted in other parts of the world come to seek asylum in the United States. And that's what we've been doing for centuries, actually, over a century. So she is alleged that she's receiving death threats from Antifa and that she's not received protection. And she's filed her petition under Section 208 of the Immigration and Nationality Act. So it's an interesting twist in our battle for immigration and discussion, right? And are people allowed to come to America correctly if they are under threat? I think that's what asylum means. So we'll see how it works out. Anyway, I'm Dr. Katherine Johnson, your host. You're watching the KJ show with me, Dr. KJ, and I'll be right back.
What if there were a super tiny device that could diagnose the brain and is smaller than a single human hair? What if you could see inside the brain to help an epilepsy patient during surgery or to help the fight against Parkinson's disease? Dr. Patricia Broderick is proud to announce the Broderick Probe, a biomedical and electronic breakthrough. Imagine a probe to help with the understanding and potential cure of brain-related diseases. To learn more, listen live to the Easy Sense radio show with host Dr. Broderick. And to help support the Broderick Foundation, please go to easysense.com and learn how, with your help, we can fight these horrific brain disorders. That's easysense.com to learn more and help support the Broderick Foundation. Author, radio show host, and coach John M. Hawkins reveals strategies to help gain perspective, build confidence, find clarity, achieve goals. John M. Hawkins' new book, Coached to Greatness, Unlock Your Full Potential with Limitless Growth, published by iUniverse. Hawkins reveals strategies to help readers accomplish more. He believes the book can coach them to greatness. Hawkins says that the best athletes get to the top of their sport with the help of coaches, mentors, and others. He shares guidance that helps readers reflect on what motivates them, rediscover and assess their core values, philosophies, and competencies, find settings that allow them to be the most productive, and track their progress towards accomplishing goals.
Hello, and welcome back to the KJ show with me, Dr. Katherine Johnson, or Dr. KJ as my friends call me. Today I'm talking about something that I had been touched on in an earlier broadcast, but I wanted to bring it back because it's sort of back in the news and it's very timely, especially with the Conference of Parties, or COP, that was being held in Brazil. Apparently, there is no consensus on when we will reach that horrible state of 1.5 degrees Celsius warming. In fact, we might have already done it. And we're still here. Isn't that amazing? So apparently when they got all those signatories to the Paris Accord in 2015, everybody was happy to sign on, because there was no consequences. It was an agreement without any teeth in it. Measuring global warming, no one will really be able to know when it happens, when this 1.5 degree increase happens. And it could happen, and we'll find out about it 10 years later. But if this is the degree warming that we're supposed to then cause catastrophic everything, right? We're going to, that's what Al Gore warned us about. We're all going to be dead. Wouldn't it be kind of bad to find out we passed this metric 10 years ago and we're still here? It kind of calls into question what I've always had to question about. How do we know what we're going to increasing when we don't have a baseline to measure it for and against? And I'm an evaluator, so I care about baselines. What is the period of time we're comparing the interventions to? Well, apparently no one has that idea either. No one's ever agreed on a baseline, which is a fairly fundamental part of scientific inquiry. World leaders at COP28 said they were arguing how to keep the world within a 1.5 degrees Celsius global temperature, but no one understands or can agree on how to measure those 1.5 degrees. From what part do we start? It was established in Paris. So I love this quote. It might come as a surprise then to hear that the Paris Statement contains no formally agreed way of defining the present level of global warming. Wrote a team of scientists from the United Kingdom's Met Office, which is basically their weather station. So the pact does not even define temperature increase explicitly and unambiguously. Again, what I've been saying pretty much my whole career is that the Paris climate change, or all these since 2015, the climate accord is really nothing. It doesn't have any teeth. It isn't grounded in science. And yet we're all supposed to agree to this arbitrary, undefined goal or metric that we're supposed to by which measure all human activity. It gets worse though. There's actually no instantaneous measure either defined to figure out if what year starts the 1.5 degree trend. Like, where do we start? From where are we measuring the temperature increase? Again, it's a fairly basic question in science: is what's the endpoint you're starting for, and then how are you going to look at it if the intervention, like you're doing an experiment, what was it before, what was it after? Well, they can't even figure out what the before was. Scary. And these are scientists, supposedly. Well, actually, no, they're really politicians. The report is that the issue is that global temperatures don't increase smoothly. And that scientists said in a report published in Nature, the report serves a suggestion about how we should measure it. But guess what? Weather is variable. In fact, today I'm in Florida and it's freezing cold. Last week it was hot. Weather is weather. The brief ups and downs that occur weeks to years owing to natural climate variability caused sometimes by climate events like El Nino, which is not a man-made phenomenon, or the effects given off by volcanic activity, and by the way, there's some volcanic activity going on in Hawaii right now, are superimposed on the long-term warming trend from human influences. So they're taking climate and then they're saying, well, humans caused it too. No. And then they're saying the global mean temperature exceeded 1.5 Celsius briefly in years 2016, 17, 19, 20, 23. Oh, so we've already reached this magical death threat of 1.5 degrees Celsius, but we haven't died? Maybe it's because it isn't going to kill us. Without an agreed metric, there can be no consensus. Maybe that's the point. And the report said this is likely to result in distraction and delay to the point where climate action is most urgent. Well, how can it be most urgent if we already experienced the 1.5 degrees Celsius rise and nothing's happened? The Earth is still spinning. We are still here. How to measure the average global temperatures to account for human changes instead of climate variability that's the question, but they don't know how to filter out the natural climate events that actually do affect the temperature of the Earth compared to what we are supposed to have caused, which, as I've told in last week's show, was like 4% of all greenhouse gases are caused by us, and 94% are caused by water vapor. I mean, come on. So one would argue that making warming a hindsight, they actually think that this is sort of bad. And the scientists are now kind of having to confess up that, hey, we don't have an agreed upon starting point of when global warming started. And in fact, in the couple weeks show, I talked about how the metric they picked about the 1890s or the 1880s was a really unusually weird decade. And that's not necessarily the right decade. It's an anomaly. Why would we pick that as a starting point? So it's all very arbitrary. And I think, frankly, very unscientific. The year that they think is, and then they also get to the point, this is what I love is, well, we're not going to really know when we exceed 1.5 degrees Celsius, and it's going to take us 20 years of figuring out when that actually happened. So we'll have hindsight. We'll know, oh yeah, 20 years ago, that's when we reached 1.5 degrees Celsius. But if we've reached that, it's kind of like, okay, so then what? So this is sort of just point how all the holes of the arguments that happen when you try to say that we humans are causing something that isn't really caused by us, and we don't really know how to measure it, and so nobody wants to be pinned down. The current UN forecast said is we're going to exceed the 1.5 degrees Celsius in 2030. Get this, plus or minus 10 years. Well, we exceeded it in 20, and then in 2020, and then it came back down, and now we're going to plus or minus 10 years. That's a heck of a confidence interval. I mean, I do statistical analysis. That is a big, big range for variability, which also goes back to the fact that they don't really have a baseline. They don't really know what's happening. They can't really tell when it does happen. So why is all the doom and gloom? This is the doom and gloom picture. Since the accepted warming between 2003 and 22 was 1.3 degrees, they think, it could be anywhere from a 0.87 to 1.3 degrees. There's just huge variability here. And they think that the first time we would actually know if we exceeded the 1.5 degrees Celsius would be 20 years after the fact, 2040. So authors of the report suggest that they need to average the previous 10 years of temperatures with a 10-year projection to establish an instantaneous indicator. Well, if we can't even agree on when it starts, how are we going to have an indicator? What are we measuring? And basically, the UN doesn't have any ideas either. They haven't even touched this issue in any of the previous, the subsequent conference on parties, including the one that was just held in Brazil. So the whole Paris Climate Treaty is really worthless, which most of us who've been in the industry know that. We just don't usually say it out loud. I'm Dr. Katherine Johnson, your host. You're watching the KJ Show with me, Dr. KJ, and I'll be right back.
Did you know that your beliefs create your entire reality, but it's the subconscious beliefs that do most of the creating? Belief shifter and life coach Shiraz can help you identify those limiting beliefs and eliminate them, often in a single session.
Like it was almost instant, like I had relief right away.
Creating better health, relationships, careers, and finances. Let Shiraz help you step out of safety and into awareness.
Definitely something's happening. It's like a flow inside. It feels good.
Whether in person or online, Shiraz provides personal coaching, belief shifting. Visit Shiraz at energeticmagic.com or call 416-529-7429. Energetic Magic. Find your greater happiness. Be well. Be aware. Be magical.
Are you struggling to care for elderly parents or a spouse? Do you wonder if being a caregiver is making you sick? Are you worried about taking time off work to care for elderly parents and balance work, life, and caregiving? Has caregiving become exhausting and emotionally draining? Are you an aging adult who wants to remain independent, but you're not sure how? I'm Pamela D. Wilson. Join me for the Caring Generation radio show for caregivers and aging adults, Wednesday evenings, 6 Pacific, 7 Mountain, 8 Central, and 9 Eastern, where I answer these questions and share tips for managing stress, family relationships, health, well-being, and more. Podcasts and transcripts of The Caring Generation are on my website, PamelaDWilson.com, plus my caregiving library, online caregiver support programs, and programs for corporations interested in supporting working caregivers. Help, hope, and support for caregivers is here on The Caring Generation and PamelaDWilson.com.
Hello and welcome back to the KJ Show with me, Dr. KJ, on my new YouTube channel. Thanks so much for tuning in. And today I'm talking about the fact that we really don't know when climate change has happened because it's a moving target. And there's no consensus on anything. So climate confusion is sort of where I wanted to go next, because it's been a big debate, especially in the last couple of weeks. And, if you talk to one set of people, you'll get one opinion. You get talk to another group, you'll get another opinion. But it's causing all kinds of climate confusion, which is upsetting to both sides of the argument. So they're saying, is it because the media is covering it, or is it because we're causing it, or is it something in between? And so Media Matters, which is a nonprofit, and also Pew Research did some studies about, is it really causing, is climate change really caused by us? Or are we thinking it's caused by us, and that's creating confusion because there's all this differing ideas. In other words, it's not settled science. In 2024, Pew Research Center reported that 62% of Americans believe that climate is a serious issue, but only 39% feel that it's adequately informed by their underlying causes. Well, I'm glad most of the population, at least about 40%, are skeptics. And climate is, of course, important because we don't want to have hurricanes and tornadoes and floods, and we want to make sure we're building buildings that can withstand all those natural disasters, and we don't want to be causing fires. And we care about the Earth, but I don't think we're the only cause of climate change. I think volcanoes have a lot to do with it too. So the knowledge gap is what they're talking about in this study, that people think that they know that we're causing it, but they're not really sure how, or which is actually not true. But meanwhile, there's all kinds of different conflicting statements from political leaders and organizations on both sides. And that makes it difficult for the public to know whom to trust. Yeah. Al Gore doesn't come to mind. The confusion isn't just a matter of curiosity, and this is what the Pew Research Center is lamenting, is we don't have a coherent climate policy because it's not been decided, because guess what? It's not settled science. So misinformation campaigns, again, on both sides, sometimes funded by industries with vested interests. This article is really taking a pot shot at the fossil fuel industry, but I would say that they can take pot shots at the solar industry too. Remember Solyndra? Went belly up and $1 billion later. So they are basically exploiting doubt on both sides. And this results that the science, according to Pew, is the society is highly concerned about climate change, but unsure if they can make a difference. You can't. It's bigger than all of us. It gets back to the hubris of humanity. I think it's amazingly ridiculous that we human beings think we control things when we can't control the tides, can't even control the orientation or the orbit of our sun around the moon, or the moon around the sun, or the Earth's rotation. I mean, there's so many things that are beyond our capabilities. To think that we would actually cause that much destruction is again silly, and it's very. I don't like the fact that we are ignoring that there are powers in nature that are do much better and much worse damage than we humans do. And nature also has a wonderful way of fixing all the mistakes we make. The media coverage, though, wields immense power in shaping how the public perceives climate change. No kidding. It's been only saying one part of the story for a long time. And so, according to Media Matters, the reporting on climate issues has grown by 30% since 2020. Yeah, who was president then? Was it the Green New Deal guy? However, most of this coverage focuses on dramatic weather events, which they then attribute to climate change, rather than maybe subtle other things, which probably aren't attributed to climate change, but it makes better TV. This can give the impression that climate change is merely a matter of bad luck or natural cycles, rather than the result of human activity. That's the article that says this? But isn't that really the truth? I love how these articles are so biased against common sense, which is why I'm bringing it to your attention. You can't always trust what you hear, and the media information means we need to be skeptical. Yes, please put up the first graph. Media framing can also reinforce existing biases, making it harder for readers to understand the new information. Here's an example of how Earth scientists, now these are not necessarily all climate scientists because it is not settled science, but some scientists say it's significant and others say little or none. But the ones who say little or none are the ones who are actual climatologists and meteorologists who study upper air and understand those things. And the other ones are maybe scientists, but they're not necessarily expert in climate. It's a very important distinction. Just because a bunch of scientists say they study something doesn't mean they know it, because as we all know, science is very, very specialized, and it can cover, being a biologist does not make you an expert on climate change. It makes you an expert on whatever biology thing you study. That's why PhDs they're experts in a very narrow field, not the whole world. The gulf between scientific consensus and public belief is very wide, as this shows. And then the UN channel, again, you want to pick up the other one, reaffirmed this in its report that they say this scurrilous number that 97% of climate scientists agree that human activities are the primary driver of global change. That actually has now been disproven over and over and over again. In fact, I did a show on it about the hot debate over global warming, and it's basically a UN reviewed this scientist, a real scientist who used to work for NASA, so he does know something about weather and climate and upper atmosphere, actually has disproven and has said that the peer-reviewed papers that were supposedly the genesis of all this climate change were actually misleading and taken out of context because the politicians wanted to go do something. What do the politicians want to do? Establish a Green New Deal that the people don't want, and it's very expensive. So anyway, so the Gallup poll found that only 47% believe of Americans, I'm surprised it's even that high, believe that human activity is the main cause of climate change, because we know it isn't, and that it really becomes a political debate. And the problem is that now that the genie is out of the bottle, and Bill Gates, of all people, is saying that climate science is wrong and we're not all going to die and we can adapt and the earth is, so earth is really better than we think it is. So this misinformation has all kinds of consequences. You can put up the last graph too, if there's one more. That this is the problem, is become climate, which should be a politically neutral topic, has now become a very polarizing debate point, to the point where people will get into fights, hopefully not at Thanksgiving, about climate change. Yes or no? Do we cause it? Do we not cause it? And it's just another political argument that isn't really based in anything other than our own political beliefs. It has nothing to do with the science. So combating misinformation, they say, requires fact checking, something that I wish these people would do, and they're not doing it. And that the political polarization is one of the major issues that is still dividing us as a country. I wonder what's going to happen once they start realizing that all that stuff that they thought was causing climate change is water vapor. Can't make money on that, though. I'm Dr. Katherine Johnson, your host. You're watching the KJ Show with me, Dr. KJ, and I'll be right back.
Mike Zorek, a three-time California state champion in Greco-Roman wrestling at 114 pounds. Mike, blind since birth, was born in Hartford, Connecticut. He was a six-time national placer, including 2 seconds, 2/3, and 2/4. He also won the Veterans Folk-Style Wrestling twice at 152 pounds. In all these tournaments, he was the only blind competitor. Nancy Zorek, a creative spirit whose talents have taken her to the stage and into galleries and exhibitions in several states. Her father, a commercial artist who shared his instruments with his daughter and helped her fine-tune her natural abilities, influenced her decision to follow in his footsteps. Ms. Zorek has enjoyed a fruitful career doing what she loves. Listen Saturday mornings at 12 Eastern for the Nancy and Mike Show for heartwarming stories and interesting talk. Master of words, powerful player. What life-changing words can Dr. Janet Smith Warfield pull out of her magical toolbox that just might mysteriously open a door you never knew was there? A door to free yourself from fear forever. Transform your rage into right action. Release your guilt. Position you into a life of freedom, purpose, passion, power, and peace. All quite suddenly, unexpectedly, and almost miraculously, with no effort on your part. Join Dr. Janet on Dancing with Words, Dancing with Wisdom, as she and her guests show you how words map our experiences, immersing you in a sound bath that relaxes your muscles, opens your mind, and supports you in co-creating your extraordinary life.
And welcome back to the KJ Show with me, Dr. Katherine Johnson, or as my friends call me, Dr. KJ, and my new YouTube channel. Thanks so much for tuning in. And today I'm talking about how difficult it is to measure climate change because the targets keep moving, and it's literally a moving target, and there's no consensus, which I find, as someone who spent a lot of time trying to figure things out, a little amusing and actually quite scary. If we don't have good scientific methods, how do we know we're doing what is correct? I don't know, something I learned in high school. Anyway, so another really funny part about the whole climate debate and the need for clean energy and green energy and this stuff is California went all in on this idea. And guess what? Like many things that happen in California, and my friend John can certainly attest to this, is that they had this notion that we needed to ramp up solar PV and we needed to create more solar, you know, generation, and we need to create more solar um, energy. The problem is there's no way to store the excess energy. So now guess what's happening? They're actually having to curtail or cut back on the solar energy. So a lot of the energy that we gather from solar energy is actually wasted. You want to put up the chart or the graph. The state curtailed 3,400 gigawatt hours. That's a lot of utility scale renewable electricity, 93%, which is produced by solar panels according to the U.S. Energy Information Administration. This is a nonpartisan, a really excellent government agency, according to their analysis. So California, which has grid problems and does have all kinds of issues with reliability, so they ramped up all these solar PV panels to generate electricity. Oh, but it happens and then they generate too much. And what do you do with the excess electricity? Well, you don't have batteries. See, this is the other part. You can't have a grid solution that relies on solar energy without having a way to store that solar energy. It's sort of a fundamental part of building a distribution system. Now, the electricity industry and the gas industry have spent decades, century, basically developing a transmission and distribution system that helps control when there's going to be an outage, helps make sure that the electricity and the electrons keep flowing. We have to improve our infrastructure. Natural gas is easier. You can just stop pumping or increase. But with electricity, you have to kind of use it or lose it sort of thing, especially solar electricity, which of course is now generated. So the problem is there's too much solar energy that California would need in the off-peak times, but they're not saving it because they don't have any batteries. Who'd have thought that would be a good idea? Wouldn't you think if you're going to put a statewide effort to generate gigawatts of power, you'd want to have, well, what happens when there's too much power? Why don't we have a storage solution? Why don't we have batteries? Nobody thought of that, did they? The curtailments are rising faster, and then the renewable generation capacity is growing. Last year, they curtailed 29% of their solar energy was curtailed, cut back. That's wasted. Now, if a utility had to curtail 23% of its, not 29% of its utility power, there'd be some problems with the utility. They'd lose money. They'd be outages. There's all kinds of problems. So California added only 12% more utility scale solar. So but they have a lot of solar in California, a lot more than they need, or more fundamentally, what they what to do with. Curtailments are at their highest in the spring in California when the sun is strong enough to generate a lot of solar power, but mild weather keeps air conditioning use in check. In other words, we have more solar PV than we can use. And with the power demand rising around the country to the AI centers and all these other things, California is behind on its climate goals. It's important for the state to start to reduce curtailments and use more of its clean energy. So California has these goals that they have to, rely more on reliable and renewable energy. The problem is they have too much renewable energy during times when they don't need it, and they don't have the batteries to offset that. The other problem is, it's just, to me, interesting that they have just spectacularly failed to build a grid that makes sense. And that's not the utilities' fault. That's the politicians' fault. So I want to put the other graph. There are a few ways that you can do it. And one of the solutions is to batteries. But you see how big those batteries are? They're big, they're cumbersome. Oh, and by the way, not only do solar panels use rare earth minerals to develop and create things, batteries use something called lithium and other important rare earth minerals or rare earth elements. And battery production is as damaging to the environment as solar PV production. So one of the reasons we don't have a lot of good batteries in place or battery solutions is because we have to use a lot of rare earth elements that are usually mined in places like Africa using children. And so, and that's to build solar PV panels and also to build batteries. So these renewable energies really don't sound that great for the environment, now do they? Basically, this article was saying that they could continue to push for electrifying everything. Let's just make everything electrified. So now you know what the push is behind electrifying buildings and cars and industrial operations. Basically, electrify everything. That might work in certain cases, but in some cases, you don't. Even to generate electricity, we rely on natural gas or coal. So electrifying everything isn't always the solution either, because if you're going to increase the electric um, consumption in a building or in a car or in a house, you also have to make sure that it has the proper voltage and it's safe and it's not going to cause fires, and that you don't just all of a sudden say we're going to have everything be electric because we have a grid that can't handle that. And electrifying everything also means increasing the costs, because believe it or not, solar is still not cheap, despite all of our subsidies. So the state can build lots and lots of batteries if they want to use up a lot of rare earth elements to store the extra solar produced during the day. But that it's doing some of it. But the problem is that they don't have enough utility scale storage available online. So they had to keep dropping. They only had they had a total of 13.2 gigawatts, but they still had to get rid of 8 gigawatts because they didn't have enough storage. So to stop wasting clean energy, which to me is so silly, California will need to sustain the battery boom that now is facing headwind. They say policy headwinds. It's not really, because I believe Trump just came up with a bunch of ways to get rare earth elements from other places than Africa, and actually do deals where we're going to get them from America. Sounds like we have a lot of places in America where they are located. And so, if we're going to push for electrification, then why don't we push for using American elements or elements that we can get from our allies rather than destroying Africa again? But it just is interesting to me, and it's sort of such a great allegory for California. Oh yeah, let's do the right thing, except when they do the right thing, it turns out that they didn't do it correctly. I'm Dr. Katherine Johnson, your host. You're watching The KJ Show with me, Dr. KJ, and I'll be right back.
Author, radio show host, and coach John M. Hawkins reveals strategies to help gain perspective, build confidence, find clarity, achieve goals. John M. Hawkins' new book, Coached to Greatness: Unlock Your Full Potential with Limitless Growth, published by iUniverse. Hawkins reveals strategies to help readers accomplish more. He believes the book can coach them to greatness. Hawkins says that the best athletes get to the top of their sport with the help of coaches, mentors, and others. He shares guidance that helps readers reflect on what motivates them, rediscover and assess their core values, philosophies, and competencies, find settings that allow them to be the most productive, and track their progress towards accomplishing goals. Did you know that your beliefs create your entire reality? But it's the subconscious beliefs that do most of the creating. Belief shifter and life coach Shiraz can help you identify those limiting beliefs and eliminate them, often in a single session.
Like, it was almost instant. Like, I had relief right away.
Creating better health, relationships, careers, and finances. Let Shiraz help you step out of safety and into awareness.
Definitely something's happening. It's like a flow inside. It feels good.
Whether in person or online, Shiraz provides personal coaching, belief shifting. Visit Shiraz at energeticmagic.com or call 416-529-7429. Energetic Magic. Find your greater happiness. Be well. Be aware. Be magical.
And welcome back to the KJ Show. You're watching me, Dr. Katherine Johnson, on my new YouTube channel. Thanks so much for tuning in. And today I'm talking about the fact that they're measuring climate change as a moving target. And the Pew Research Center basically posited as, well, it's bad that Americans are skeptical of climate data, and that it's bad that they don't buy into the notion that it's human caused. Well, that's actually what the media wants to say, but it's not true. And so I went back to one of my favorite topics of I went back and found some research that basically said that the UN is misusing the climate data to scare us all. Now, the scientists that wrote this article are much more eloquent about that, but that's really what they're saying, is that distorting the view of our climate future is the misuse and abuse of climate pathways and scenarios. Now, one of the things you do when you forecast is you create different scenarios with different assumptions. But the most important thing in creating those scenarios or pathways are the assumptions. And so naturally, you want to make sure that the assumptions are rooted in some sort of reality. But according to these scientists, the UN assumptions for scenarios are not. They're not based on reality. They're based on worst case scenario types of things. So climate research and assessment has, the panel for Intergovernment Panel on Climate Change, aka the UN, has been grounded in methodologies of building assumptions, anticipating changes in the Earth's climate and assessing alternative responses. But 20 years ago, the scenarios that were used in climate research were plausible as alternative futures, but without associated other events. Now, and it's also 20 years later, scenarios in climate research keep getting worse, and the assessment is increasingly used as projections or predictions of the future. So they're taking what was a forecasting model that this might happen if, under these set of circumstances, and they're actually saying this will happen. That is not how scenarios are done. Even economic scenarios, you need to have some sort of reality of this is what could happen, and usually have multiple scenarios because there's multiple considerations and interactions and all kinds of things. And it's very difficult. We do this kind of work in the energy industry. It's called potential studies. And you have to do multiple different variations to figure out what is technically feasible, possible, what is economically possible, what is theoretically possible, and then you have to come up with actually what's going to happen. And so the scenarios that these folks are using are what, is the most unlikely scenario, but that's what they're creating. And that's what they're using to justify all these policies about climate change. The scenarios are, according to this author, is saying that scenarios are misused because they offer a restricted and misleading perspective on possible futures and potentially influence substance and evaluation of different policy options. Yeah, if you're only looking at the glass as half full all the time, you kind of miss the fact that the glass is half empty too, right? Or vice versa. The issue of climate has become so politicized, as I showed you earlier, that both advocates on both sides are really arguing over what scenarios we should use, what are the baseline assumptions we should use. And then it gets back to the fact that the public believes that, we don't want to destroy the climate. We want to, and that usually comes in the guise of not wanting to create more danger and air pollution. Come to find that when we clean up the air, the clouds don't have as much water, so the earth warms a little bit. So they don't even take those types of factual scientific effects into account in these scenarios. So they're basically developing climate scenarios that are, I would think, closer to fairy tales. And that could provide, create legislation or create talking points for politicians to force us to do climate policies that frankly don't make economic sense or actual sense at all. And this is what the problem is. Scientifically, it's not scientifically valid. Integrity issues are not being considered. It's a matter of political expediency. So the politicians don't want to know the scientific truth. They want to know what is the takeaway that I can go and scare my constituents, and so I can then have them give $1 billion to Solyndra or support electric vehicle bus companies that go bust. Yes, Jennifer Grantham was a big investor, former DOE secretary. But beyond the issue of climate and claims of scientific authority and policies, also depend upon the ability to self-correct. And that's where the science debate falls apart. There's no such thing as settled science. It's science. And it's always going to find new things. In fact, as I mentioned before, we're finding new kinds of dinosaurs. We're finding go ahead and put it up. We're finding new signs of dinosaurs. We're finding all kinds of different things that we thought we knew all about the dinosaurs. Well, we're still finding new stuff. And the dinosaurs were millions of years ago. So how do we think we know everything about climate change when we've only been really talking about it for the last 15, 20 years? This is an example of how a scenario gets built and then becomes evolving into, well, it's not just a series of economic assumptions and fundamental assumptions and scientific assumptions. It's actually fact, which isn't true. So very simply, these scenarios start having a life of their own. And they sort of, people forget that they're based on assumptions and they think it's true, and it isn't. So the misuse of scenarios in climate research and assessment is also, I have to say this a little bit clearer, includes the inappropriate identification of extreme, implausible scenarios, as then they make that the business as usual case. Like that's the status quo. But it isn't. It's not rooted in reality at all. And they basically say that it's the improper comparison of scenarios generated from different assessment models. So what they're saying is that really, truly, they're creating these worst case scenarios and saying, well, that's the future, absent of any actual fact. And that's what's they've been using, these politicians have been using to scare us for 20, 30 years. And it's not true. We know it's not true. So this neither type of scenario misuse is not particularly a new idea, but it is sort of a surprising that we're talking about all these complicated models that are supposed to be integrated, can account for all kinds of things. We turn out it's really not. It's just a collection of assumptions that haven't necessarily been based on reality or rooted back to reality. And they take the worst case scenario and say, well, that's what's going to happen to scare us. The other ones pointed out, another thing that came out too is baseline scenarios have to be very important to creating, we need real scenarios based in facts to create policy solutions that make sense. We shouldn't be relying on assumptions made by politicians rather than by scientists. And see, this is another example of how we have been told that we're all going to die by 2100, but it's wrong. It keeps moving. They have these projections about global warming, but then you know what? Darn it, we have a cold snap and it gets cold again. Or it was global cooling and now it's global warming and now it's just climate change. Because guess what? Weather does what weather is going to do. It's variable, and we live in a variable world. So the misuse of these types of scenarios in climate change also leads back to what I was saying previously. That Americans are starting to realize that maybe the scientists aren't telling the truth. And did scientists falsify research to support their own theories on global warming? 59% of Fox viewers said yes. Look at that. We're only 26% said not very likely. So now it's coming out that the UN scientists falsify data to promote policy objectives rather than being purely objective scientists. And that to me is a fundamental flaw in the whole climate industry. We're not being truthful. We're not doing science as science should be done. We're doing it for political gain. And, both sides are guilty of this, but it is really bad when these policies end up spending trillions of dollars that could have been used to do what even Bill Gates is now advocating: improve human health. Doesn't happen. It's just amazing. I'm Dr. Katherine Johnson, your host. You're watching The KJ Show with me, Dr. KJ, and I'll be right back.
Are you struggling to care for elderly parents or a spouse? Do you wonder if being a caregiver is making you sick? Are you worried about taking time off work to care for elderly parents and balance work, life, and caregiving? Has caregiving become exhausting and emotionally draining? Are you an aging adult who wants to remain independent, but you're not sure how? I'm Pamela D. Wilson. Join me for the Caring Generation radio show for caregivers and aging adults, Wednesday evenings, 6 Pacific, 7 Mountain, 8 Central, and 9 Eastern, where I answer these questions and share tips for managing stress, family relationships, health, well-being, and more. Podcasts and transcripts of The Caring Generation are on my website, PamelaDWilson.com, plus my caregiving library, online caregiver support programs, and programs for corporations interested in supporting working caregivers. Help, hope, and support for caregivers is here on The Caring Generation and PamelaDWilson.com.
What if there were a super tiny device that could diagnose the brain and is smaller than a single human hair? What if you could see inside the brain to help an epilepsy patient during surgery or to help the fight against Parkinson's disease? Dr. Patricia Broderick is proud to announce the Broderick Probe, a biomedical and electronic breakthrough. Imagine a probe to help with the understanding and potential cure of brain-related diseases. To learn more, listen live to the Easy Sense radio show with host Dr. Broderick. And to help support the Broderick Foundation, please go to easysense.com and learn how, with your help, we can fight these horrific brain disorders. That's easysense.com to learn more and help support the Broderick Foundation.
Hello and welcome back to the KJ Show with me, Dr. KJ, your Katherine Johnson, your host. And I always like to end the show with something fun. And since I've had an enormous amount of work to do in the last few weeks, I found this interesting study that came up with all these really cool graphs, but they also found out that Europe, surprise, has the shortest work weeks, while South America and poor countries have the longest work weeks. Gee, I wonder why. So here's all the different work weeks they compiled in this study. Where Russia, they work like 38 hours a week. Bhutan, I think it used to be called something else, works 50, almost 55 hours a week on average. These are average workers. In Jamaica is 43 hours. And the United States, 36 hours. I'm like, who in the United States works only 36 hours a week? Clearly not me. Canada is even less at 32 hours a week. So basically, what I was trying to illustrate is that well-developed countries and democracies like the ones in Europe, because they have so many of these other technological advances, their workers can probably be more productive without having to work as many hours. And it's sort of the benefit of the modern world. Whereas in other places, when you're poor, you got to work harder. I mean, it's not that different from when I'm sorry, Peru got cut off in Uruguay, and I forgot the other one, but they actually work a lot harder. And in Sudan, it's 50 hours or more. In Lesotho, it's 50 hours. In Congo, is 48 hours. And if you think about it, though, going back to the American beginning of the American culture and the American economy, a 40-hour work week was only established because of the labor unions. I'm pretty sure my ancestors who were farmers in the prairies of Minnesota worked more than 40 hours a week. And I've read a lot of Laura Ingalls Wilder books where she talks about how even as a child, she used to get up and work 8-12 hours during the harvest period. So this 40-hour work week is kind of an artificial illusion based on the unions in the in the 40s. But really, it doesn't happen. And in most places, in industrialized economies, now they're down to 36 hours or 32 hours in Holland and France, and because it's all unionized. But that's because they have the economy that they don't have to work 40 plus hours a week because we can harvest our food more efficiently than we could 100 years ago. Unfortunately, in other countries where we don't have the same level of economic advancement, you have to work harder because they don't have all the technology that makes it easier for us Americans to cut back. But I have to say, the United States says it sits about 36 hours a week, but above the other major developed nations. I mean, France only works 30 hours a week on average. In the UK, 31 hours. I mean, I love France, but they're also, if you go to France, they're also on strikes quite a bit. Maybe that contributes to the 30-hour work week. But I love in France, they actually televise and say in advance when they're going to have strikes which kind of defeats the purpose of a strike. But the point I'm really getting at is, I thought it was an interesting study. I have never in my life worked just 36 hours a week, unless I was maybe on maternity leave. But then when you're a mom, you're 24/7. So even then you're working. So the point is, it's interesting to see that, in some ways, technology has really benefited us, but it isn't an even distribution. And I think we should be worried about our African friends. Why can't we help them out? I'm Dr. Katherine Johnson. I hope you've enjoyed today's show. I certainly have. And I'll see you next week. Have a great week.
This has been The KJ Show. Tune in next week as Katherine shares her insights to current changes in the energy industry while drawing on her experience as an energy efficiency consultant for the past 30 years, right here on The KJ Show.